Hello, this is Ingrid Croce. I'm at BackstageAxxess, where the real show begins.
Like the pine trees lining the winding road, I've got a name, I've got a name. Like a singing bird.
Hello everyone, this is Tom Jennings from BackstageAxxess.com. We're here with Ingrid Croce, who is the wife of the late Jim Croce, and she's just come out with a book called I Got a Name, the Jim Croce Story, written with her current husband, Jimmy Rock. And I mean, obviously the starting point is going to be, and everyone's going to want to know, why did it take so long for this book to come out?
Well, we really, I wanted to write this book a long time ago, and we started this book 25 years ago. We wrote it, my fiance at the time, Jimmy Rock, and I wrote this book. It took us about 4 years to do it. We interviewed as many friends and family and fans as we could. But honestly, I know this sounds strange for those who haven't read the book. I couldn't really feel that the book was ready. The book was ready, or I was ready. And one of the things that also was very interesting, and the reason that Jimmy Rock, my fiance, ended up writing this with me, which really wasn't easy for him when he, but in the end it all worked out great, is that, he had seen that when I told my story to people that, some people wanted to write the book or do a movie, every time I would tell the story, they would come back and they would write something that I hadn't written. And it was so strange. You tell a story and you have it in your head, but they'd come back and tell it from their perspective. So at one point, Jimmy, okay, I'll help you. Jimmy said to me, I'll help you write the book. I can see that what you want to get, what you want to tell is not what people are able to understand. And it was truly a wonderful journey. And, we got to know each other. There's no secrets between us. And in the end, we feel very, very proud of this book. And we're happy that it is out. I Got a Name, the Jim Croce Story is the best way we could have expressed what I really needed to tell in terms of the story.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's a very intense read. And, and there's about 2 or 3 different angles that we could even take on this interview. But I think the part that I kind of took away with was that it seemed like at one point that maybe the relationship was a little bit, it wasn't completely resolved, and that had to do with a lot of the problems with writing the book, if you know what I mean. Like when he died, you guys weren't necessarily at a real good point.
Actually, when he died, things had been resolved, and he was at a great point. And that's, when you read the last letter in the book that Jim wrote to me while he was on the road, right before he passed away, he wrote a letter to me that you can read. It's basically on the last page of the book.
Right.
And it ties it all together. It really talks about, talks to the dream he had of family and really making things work and having things together. It was, it came to me after he passed away, but it was a very heartfelt letter, and his dream was, to be able to live a lot longer and be able to share the things he'd always hoped he could, which is why, Time in a Bottle is such a prophetic song. It wasn't written at the end, but in fact, it was written kind of at the beginning of when his career was really starting to blossom. He wrote it when he found out that, I was pregnant with our son, AJ, and so, from the beginning of the relationship to the end, we were kids. I was 16 when Jim and I met, just 16, and he passed away when I was 26. So it was a very quick and very intense relationship.
Now, it must have been painful to sit there and maybe in some ways feel helpless because you weren't on the road with him and you guys started out together and all that stuff, but to really just see him get so exploited. We hear these stories all the time, but I thought it was very interesting to hear this from the spouse's perspective, realizing that as he's becoming more popular, you guys went, it almost seemed like that the struggles like you had in New York City really brought you close together. but then the success became almost more of a burden than trying to achieve the success, because with the success came a lot of other complications that maybe you didn't anticipate.
It wasn't. It's an interesting thing. I think there's so many aspects of this, and I'll try to come from at least two or three of them. Jim's parents didn't want Jim to be a musician. He'd gone to college and graduated with a couple of degrees, and they'd never had anyone in their family go to college before, so they expected Jim to perform like an adult, not be a gypsy on the road. And back then, being a musician was not necessarily a glorious thing. Fame wasn't synonymous with success. So not like it is today. So they weren't very happy for this, and it was a conflict for Jim. He wanted to please his parents. He wanted to make them happy, but he really wanted to do music. That's what he loved to do. So being on the road from that perspective was hard, because they were never happy about his being on the road. But I wanted him, of course, I'd been on the road with him for several years, and I always wanted him to do what he needed to do. And both of us had decided when he went on the road alone that we were willing to sacrifice what our time together, so that he could get out there and make it, and then we would be together, which of course at the end, never happened, because his plane crashed it happened too soon. His plane crashed when he was only 30, so we never got to really enjoy the time together. But his being on the road, he called me every single day. The real thing that I think ate at him, beside, the situation with me and the original problem, was because I had been raped while I was in Mexico, was a serious issue for him. He treated me. He was the first man I'd ever been with. I was a virgin. I was a Madonna, and it was a different time period. If you go back, 50 years. When we met, it's a long time ago, and the women's rights movement hadn't really developed yet. I mean, it was developing, and the night that Jim played, the last night he played, was the Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, fight of the century, so to speak. So women's liberation really was just in the throes, right then and there. And so there was a different perspective of the way people dealt with rape, and how a couple would certainly have dealt with rape, And so for Jim being on the road, and the way in which he felt at that time, what I wanted to do was to stay as close to him as I could in terms of our friendship. But that, I knew that he had to do this and do what he needed to do to feel secure. So not receiving money during that period, having, like you say, being on the road, not receiving any money, and watching this happen was a torment, And of course, if I asked about it, it was something he didn't like conflict, so he didn't want to deal with it, and it was very, very hard. It was hard for him, it was hard for me, and ultimately it led into over a decade of litigation.
Yeah, and I mean that story isn't necessarily uncommon, but boy, when you read about it from a personal perspective, it's absolutely incredible. That and in some ways, what I took away from the book was, boy, I'm glad these major labels don't have nearly the power that they had before, because they were these abusive corporate entities.
Well, I fought for 10 years for artists' rights, for intellectual property, and though I didn't win for myself, I did win for others. So I've always felt really good about the fact. I feel sad about the fact that I didn't have the time I wished I'd had with my own son, because I was traveling. I had 3 litigations, and it was a very tough time. But now that it's over, I know that's what I had to do, and I feel very lucky that even though I didn't win, in 1998, federal copyright law changed, and I was able, and AJ and I, our son AJ Croce and I, were able to receive the domestic publishing back, which was really rewarding after all those years. So it was a good thing, and it was. It still remains, and we, both of us in our own way, try to keep Jim's music and memory alive. It's very important to both of us.
Yeah, and reading about, like you touched on it before about how his father was just so anti, him going into music. And again, you said it was a generational thing, which it really was. And here you have your son AJ, who has a career in his own right. So you went the opposite direction as far as encouraging him with music, I assume.
Absolutely. AJ went blind when he was almost 4. He had a brain tumor syndrome that he regained sight eventually around 10 in his one eye. But he started playing piano at a very, very young age. And, of course, it's very astute when you only have touch and sound and you don't have your sight. And he became he is a spectacular piano player and started writing at a very young age, would spend hours on the piano. And, in the last several years, of course, he's playing guitar as well. But he... It was because of that, of course, his going blind and also his love for music that, you couldn't deny someone that was his passion. So I do believe people should follow their dreams and whatever it is, eventually you'll end up doing something that you've been practicing for thousands of hours that you'll do very well. And I'm good with that. I'm really good with that.
All right, and one last question, and again, I probably could talk about this book for hours because, and anyone listening, this really is a book that you have to pick up. But, when you reconstructed the events that led up to that plane crash, and I know at some point you went and you visited the actual site of it and everything, and down in Louisiana. Did you look at it? Because as I read it, I kept scratching my head, going, "Wow, just a whole series of crazy events that came together that this was just such a senseless thing." The part I think about is that pilot who had said he'd had a heart attack and everything, and he's running down the road in this town that sounds very rural, I guess, for lack of a
it was very rural,
very rural area. And you're just thinking, wow, why didn't people just use a little bit of common sense with regard to letting this guy fly a plane or whatever? Did it seem senseless, or you've just kind of looked at it? I almost got the sense that you looked at it and says, well, this is just the way it had to be, and you have that kind of quiet resolve.
I didn't have a quiet resolve. But I've come to a quiet resolve because there was, when someone passes away, you have to deal with that, and you have to keep working at moving on, And I guess for me, there is poetic justice in the fact that his music outlives him and hopefully will outlive him forever. Maybe not forever, but certainly for as long as I live. And his music, for many, many people, and even, the DVD that AJ and I have done, Have You Heard Jim Croce Live? The DVD that we did, the restaurant and jazz bar that I keep open, it's been almost 30 years now. And AJ, who is once in a while performing Jim songs, you keep Jim alive, and he is in my heart and soul every day. And I think that's the most important thing about the resolve that I've come to. I mean, I think that if you let someone's memory go, they don't live anymore. So for me, I'll never let Jim's memory go. And every time somebody sings one of his songs or, hears one of his songs and it touches them, I feel that the resolve is there.
Yeah, well, I'd say the book is a beautiful tribute to him and certainly a testament to you as a great artist as well. So,
well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking with you. We could talk a long time. Maybe we need to do this again.
If you want, if you ever come out this way, I know you have in the book I mentioned you there were some relatives in Rochester, New York. That was a little factoid I didn't know because that's where I'm from. That's where I work actually. So.
Look, I'll tell you what, Tom. I do get out to see them. I haven't seen them in a long time, and we were just saying, gosh, we wonder if the people in Rochester have gotten the book. So I'm going to have to get in touch with the relatives.
You should, yeah. We got a great Barnes and Noble out in the Rochester area that still does a lot of traffic, and I think the print.
You know what, Tom? I'm going to do it. Well, can we do this again when it's time for us to come up to New York? I'm going to be doing New York. We're going to do Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and we can then do, before we get up to Rhode Island, we could come up and do Rochester, which would be fabulous. So let's keep in touch.
Okay, I will.
It'll be in the winter, toward the winter time, so I know it'll be crazy snow in Rochester, but we'll try to make our way through it.
It's only crazy snow to people that aren't used to the snow. In Rochester, it's okay. We've become accustomed to it because we trade in the earthquakes for the snow. So we'll take.
I know. I'm knocking on wood that there's no more earthquakes and a little less snow for you guys. So anyway, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I will, if we're coming up north, back east and up north, we will come visit.
Okay, absolutely. And again, I really appreciate the time. I really, really appreciate the book, and hopefully before too long we'll get a chance maybe to sit down and share a cup of coffee or something and just chat.
I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. Thanks so much for calling.
Okay, have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I've got a name. I've got a name. And I carry it with me like my daddy did. But I'm living the dream that he kept here. Moving me down the highway, rolling me down the